Yes. Is that it? Look, there are already hundreds of videos on this topic, so you probably don't need my opinion. But
more people say the level of violence on video games is really shaping young people's thoughts.
So look, video games have a very bad reputation, and every few years we hear about how video games are the new Antichrist and how that they've inspired the next mass shooting.
Violent video games are harmful to our children.
As if someone was a perfectly functioning member of society until one day they played one game of Call of Duty, a game typically based on historical events, and then bam, suddenly they're a psychopathic killer. When you put these arguments in reference, they sound as ridiculous as they actually are. Typically, video games are used as a scapegoat for people to place the blame for other failings of society. A kid shoots someone after a lifetime of bullying and parental abuse. It must have been that game of solitaire they played when they were 4. Rampant wealth inequality or a lifetime of poverty. Club Penguin membership. Obviously, I'm being hyperbolic. But if we want to get serious and accurate, there have been tons of studies looking into the correlation of violent video games and real-world violence. And do you know what they found? Nothing! Not a goddamn thing. Now I'll be the first to admit that sometimes studies can be wrong, and sometimes researchers can inject their own biases into the results. So out of the interest of fairness, let's look at some reports that have alleged to find a correlation between violent video games and real-world aggression. This paper found that when you account for an aggressive family life, you see a 5% increase in aggression from kids when they play violent video games. 5%. People have developed more aggression when accidentally kicking the corner of their own desk, but there's no investigation into toe stubbing as the cause of the next mass shooter. Now there are other studies that find higher reported numbers, such as this paper, which finds a 95% direct significant correlation between the amount of playing video games among adolescents and anxiety/depression, being withdrawn/depressed, rule-breaking behaviours, aggression, and social problems. Now that sounds pretty damning, until you realise that they're lumping in being aggressive and having antisocial behaviours with being anxious and depressed. Not only that, they don't mention from a quick skim at least if they account for other possible variables such as a violent family life. Firstly, people with high levels of anxiety and depression play video games. Now, does this link mean that people played video games and became depressed and anxious? Or were they already sad and anxious from some other source and sought escapism in video games? Next, a correlation does not mean a causation. If a kid has a violent family life, maybe they are more likely to be violent themselves and seek escape through video games. In which case there isn't a direct link between video games and violence, just that both are caused by a third factor. To make a long story short, there's little consistency in these reports. Now in some fields of research, that could be okay, but if you're trying to make the argument that video games are the number one cause of violence in today's society, you wouldn't expect to see a variation of results from no impact whatsoever to 100% increases your aggression. This brings us to our next point. People are always looking to censor video games. You don't see people looking to ban the production of violent books or paintings. At least not anymore that the new guy is in town. This is often because paintings, sculptures and literature are often protected by the broad umbrella of, well, it's artistic expression, it couldn't possibly be negatively influencing our children. Now that's a fine argument and there's definitely something to be said about the freedom of artistic expression, but I would argue video games deserve the same respect. Okay, to answer this question we're going to have to establish a few things first. Firstly, what's a video game? Well, the finest Google search will tell you that a video game is a game played by electronically manipulating images produced by a computer program on a monitor or other display. Next, what is art? Is this an art? What about this?
Is this goose art?
Well, back to Google, and you'll find that art is the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form, such as a painting or sculpture, producing the works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. Now this quote specifies visual, but I would include auditory and storytelling as well. I mean, you won't find anyone arguing that Bach's Cello Suite No. 1 in G major isn't art, you know? So let's go through these component branches of artistic expression. For most of us, we're going to focus on one game to get the point across, because if one game can be art, then they all can be. Works appreciated for their beauty. Hello? There are numerous games that have pushed the limits of visual beauty. So let's talk The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. This game was originally panned for its art style due to a lack of realism, but since has garnered massive support for its beautiful visuals. Wind Waker creates gorgeous scenes, whether it's a ghost ship at sea, a high-reaching island that pierces the sky, or even a simple waterfall. Games like Limbo can establish beautiful scenes using only grayscale. Little Nightmares, Shadow of the Colossus, Journey, Skyrim, The Witness, Hollow Knight, No Man's Sky. Take a random frame from any of these games and bam, instant masterpiece. And this is just a handful of the many titles. There's even a Wikipedia page that's devoted to listing all the video games that are considered to be highly artistic. If a painting is art, surely 60 paintings per second is art. Surely 60 paintings per second that you can explore and look at wherever you want is art. If someone makes a game where you can walk through an art museum, Is that not art? Look, the main point is, if pretty pictures equals art, and games have many pretty pictures, then games equals art. If you watched my last video, you'll know my opinion on music and its importance in video games. Music is a key cornerstone for video games. Imagine any prominent video game you've played, and imagine it without the music. It's either impossible, or you're left with a vastly inferior product. Music is too intrinsically tied to video games because it's tied to its artistic expression. Going back to Wind Waker, this game has some phenomenal musical pieces that sell the ideas of the environments they're part of. The Outset Island theme performs its job of conveying a small, calm little village, while also instilling the feeling of there being some kind of great adventures to be had ahead. The same for the eerie discordance of the Ghost Ship theme, which helps to make you feel more uneasy. Even as a kid, you're scared before you have a grasp of what's going on, all because the music resonates with something inside us that invokes fear. The point is, these sound pieces invoke an emotion in the player. These songs perform their job so effectively, they could easily be performed in an orchestral ensemble. In fact, they quite often are to sold out shows. That's right, video game nerds like the music so much they will go out to a theatre and listen to them being professionally performed live, like it's a goddamn 15th century. In fact, a few years ago I was looking up to see a live performance by Emer Noon and the National Symphony Orchestra, where she conducted a concert that interlaced both well-known video game music and the classical pieces they were directly inspired by. And this is all without going into the large number of remixes and covers that populate Spotify and YouTube, but this proves the point. Video game music is so good at expressing emotional intent it is likened to that of classical music, and often shares the stage with it. And it covers genres from classical to techno. So we've covered visuals and music, two key cornerstones of the classical interpretation of art. Next, we go on to the oldest form of art. Since the dawn of sentience and complex life, ideas have been communicated through storytelling. Big bad predator killed half your tribe? You tell stories of it that pass through generations to keep your species safe. The communication of ideas have existed far longer than the spoken word, and with communication comes the passing of stories, fables of mythical creatures that explain why you shouldn't eat the yellow snow or speak to strangers. As humanity progressed, so too did our stories, conveying more complex scenarios, concepts, and employing new methods to invoke emotions. Now I would argue that video games are far more effective at inducing emotional weight in the player than movies, books, or paintings. It's one thing to be sad over the death of a character in a film, but another to be sad when you've played the character's life, truly felt their struggles, and been a part of their successes. This is why we feel their sadness, their elation, their fear. To go back to Wind Waker, this is one of the most classic storytelling frameworks. A hero from humble beginnings goes on a big adventure where he's thrown into the unknown and has to prove himself. This archetype is well known as the hero's journey. But to emphasise this point of artistic storytelling, I'll use one of the most common used scapegoats for blaming violence on video games.
You will be okay. Do you hear me? They flooded their own metro in an effort to kill us, Dmitri. But once again, they failed. And once more, we cheat death.
As the player, we played through key pivotal points of World War II and followed Sergeant Reznov and Dmitri as they battled against the Germans, all culminating to a final push into the German heartlands. Battling up to the roof of the Reichstag, a bombardment clears all enemies from the roof, their last stand. You pick up the Russian flag and move through the dust-filled air. A lone scarlet Nazi flag stands against the smoke-filled sky, a final symbol of the last remnant of the Nazi army. As you approach, a lone Nazi soldier shoots you. Sergeant Reznov comes to your rescue, slaying the lone soldier.
You can make it, my friend. You always survive.
After a few words of encouragement, he cuts the rope and we watch as the Nazi flag crumples to the wind as the sun peeks through the cloudy sky. This is clearly symbolic of how we have fought to crumple the Nazi regime. We hobble forward and plant the Russian flag, signifying an end to the war. End to the death and the hatred of one of the largest wars in human history. We're told that
As long as you live, the heart of this army can never be broken. Things will change, my friend. As heroes, we will return to Russia's embrace.
well, I can't imagine a more artistic and symbol-filled representation of World War II, and I'm sure none that would give more pride to those who fought for what's right. This is art. This is a visual means by which to instill emotions of pride, joy, and exhaustion. Now you're probably thinking you've caught me here. Instill emotions, like making you more aggressive? Yes, video games can make you aggressive. Just listen to the multiplayer pre-game lobby.
No, it's Modern Warfare 2.
Fucking Modern Warfare 2!
No, it's not.
But the question is, do they make you more aggressive, and more aggressive in your daily lives? In fact, the opposite effect is more likely true. Video games provide a safe, controlled outlet on which to express your aggression, thus not storing up for one big outburst. The film Anger Management gives a good example of these outlets of aggression and what happens when they're bottled up.
Let me explain something, Dave. There are two kinds of angry people. explosive and implosive. Explosive is the kind of individual that you see screaming at the cashier for not taking their coupons. Implosive is the cashier who remains quiet day after day and finally shoots everyone in the store.
These are the exact same emotions you gain when watching your favourite sports ball game where the pitcher scores a home run. Checkmate. But no one in their right mind would suggest that sports cause an increase in violence, despite the high number of riots and fights after football games. Even if it were proven that sports caused a heightened persistent quantity of aggression, would we think to try to ban it, or would we strive to improve the surroundings to alleviate the pressure it caused? Christ, even the ancient Romans recognised people's needs for bread and circuses. Video games are art in the same way that books and paintings are, in that they're more of a medium by which to express art. In the same way that there are bad video games, there are bad books or paintings. But this doesn't take the label of art from it. Art goes through stylized periods, and we are currently in a post-postmodernism period. This means that what is considered art has been recognised to be extremely subjective. This means someone will buy a painting of a square for 60 million, or a blank canvas for 50 million, or an invisible sculpture for 18,000. Jesus Christ, what am I doing with my life? In conclusion, video games are the culmination of our technological progress in combining all aspects of art into one, and they shouldn't be judged and painted with some broad negative brush because some small group of people all having liked video games. I mean, did you know that Hitler, Stalin and Mussolini all inhaled oxygen and turned it into carbon dioxide? Jesus, with a correlation that strong we might have to reconsider breathing. The best way to counter these arguments is to hold aloft the beacons of artistic endeavour in video games. Hold high our Firewatches and our The Witnesses and our Oris in the Blind Forest and even our Right to Hell retributions. Because if we don't counter these arguments, the middle-aged mothers and 1,000-year-old billionaires will win. And with that, it's all from me. Cheers, take it easy.